very much on similar paths, but quite different approaches and in a lot of ways. I know that there's some questions in the chat box already, but if you want to ask a question, please do pop it up there now. Remember to put the asterisks on, the name of the speaker, and then your question. And then I'm going to hand it over now to Jeff, who's going to run the Q&A session for this evening. Over to you, Jeff. You need to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Alison. I always begin by saying I'm just a bloke and I can only do one thing at a time. So I will do my very best to facilitate this Q&A session. Some basic protocol. I am collecting the questions as they come in, so it's on a first in, first out basis. And to all the three presenters, you don't have exclusive rights to answer the question. So if question may be directed at one presenter, any of the other two can chip in with their opinion or response to that. Okay, so here we go. So question from Dave Craig to Davey. Question about a gold mine. Davey, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, so no, the gold mine's not on our land. Well, it's not even our land, it's Scottish Government's land. The gold mine, the Cornish gold mine, is just across the valley from us in Tyndrum, but we do have gold in them there hills. But even if we could mine it, it wouldn't be ours. Crown has responsibility for all gold mining rights. So, but yes, you know, it's not our gold mine, easy answer.
Thanks for that, Davey. I assume nobody else wants to respond to that one. Davey, you're going to be very popular on this, by the way, just to manage your expectations. I've got a question from David Scallon to yourself about farm payments. David, do you want to go ahead? If David is not in a position to ask the question himself, I can do that. And it's, is the Montaigne woodland eligible for farm payments?
No, it's regarded as ineligible land, so we don't get any farm payment on it. We did get a woodland grant to establish it 21 years ago, but that was the only public funding that we get from that area of land.
Okay, I'm going to assume that that is a satisfactory answer, Davey, and we'll move on. I've got a question from Roderick to yourself, Davey. Roderick, do you want to go ahead? Oh, thank you, Roderick. You've just told me about lack of microphone at your end. So, Davey, what is your definition of water quality?
So it's not my definition of water quality, it's SEPA, Scottish Environment Protection Agency's definition of water quality, and it's a combination of chemical, biological and physical characteristics of any one water course. But I recognise at least one ex-SEPA colleague in the audience, but if you wanted exact definitions, you would need to go into the SEPA website and find that. But it's a standard definition that's been applied across all of Europe, not just here in Scotland.
Jeff, could I just, I think this is an important issue. So I've been trying to ask.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so like in a Boyne, we used to get our water from Glentanner, and I remember as a kid they put all the, we did all the plumbing to make the, it's EU compliant or whatever. But then they made the decision to, take all the water from Invercranny Bankery and then put it in pipelines back up, pump it back up the valley. And I think one of the main reasons was water quality. So if the deer died or something died in the Glentanner, and I think it was also because it was drying out more than there was a combination. Yeah, but that's like the symptom. And then Loch Mick is full of water and Loch Conor, it's like, so I don't think there's like, it's not like there's a scarcity of water, I would think, in the Dee Valley to allow us to plummet. But so yeah, it does puzzle me that we've got ourselves into this situation. But the other thing is that there is citizen science projects. So most people will come to Boyne and visit me now, tell me I've got horrible water because it tastes so cloudy. So I'm just saying I think it's a big topical issue, and And, you know, why we make these decisions is still a puzzlement to me.
Thanks for that, James. I was just briefly distracted. My dearly beloved has just brought me a very welcome cup of tea. So, cracking on. I've got a question from Malcolm to Davey about traditional farming methods. Malcolm, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Yeah, it's Mrs. Malcolm.
Oh, you're using Malcolm's computer.
Yes, that's right. I am. You know, a lot of farmers have been brought up to farm a certain way. And, you know, and I expect this has probably started already, having to farm a different way to produce public benefits, you know. And James mentioned how important it is to get people on side for any changes. Do you envisage any difficulty in persuading people who've been used to farming one way to farm another way? What is the proportion? Do you have any idea of the proportion of traditional farming and, you know, public benefits?
Oh, well, the second part of that question is much more difficult to answer. That will vary from one site to another. The opportunities will vary from one farm or croft to another. Going back to your original question then, I can speak about upland farmers. I come from an upland farm, and so I'm allowed to be rude about upland farmers as much as praising them as well. So upland farmers in Scotland are amongst the most conservative, with a small c, farmers. They're very reluctant to change. They want to do it the same way as their father, grandfathers, etc., 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 have actually done. In a non-COVID year, we would be regularly having events on the farm and speaking at events away from the farms, and trying to actually raise awareness, change perceptions, change attitudes, and get farmers to come on board more. And it's going to be a combination of both a financial recognition. So currently, there's no real financial reward for delivering these public goods. And if we get to a stage where we are recognising these public goods as valuable output from farms and willing to invest some form of public funding to pay those farmers for doing that, that will help get some of them on board. But also, I don't know where the majority of people are on the call, but also I have been re-emphasising a lot in recent years where the public goods story from a farmer's perspective, most farmers think of public goods as being something that benefits somewhere else on the farm, but the vast majority of changes in management that could be implemented on an individual farm will actually also be beneficial to that farm itself in terms of increasing its sustainability. And if any of you are in the sort of the northeast area of Scotland and get the Press and Journal, I write a monthly article in the Press and Journal each month, and the one before Christmas was all about highlighting that farmers should actually recognise that delivery of public goods, much of it will actually benefit them and the future sustainability of their farms. And it's just trying to get that message across as well. They're not just delivering for wider society, they're delivering for the future of their farms as well. But it will be a difficult task. It has been a difficult task to date, whether changes in agricultural support policy, environmental policy, and particularly if we get more conditions attached to any future public payment for land management, that may actually help increase that move.
Thank you.
Hopefully that helps.
Jeff, I was just going to add that we had a young farmer, a third-generation farmer in Tarland, Gavin Robertson, I couldn't quite remember his name during my talk, along with Ben McDonald. And so he talked about his regenerative farming and cover crops, and it's clearly a story in the Cromar Basin about the benefits to the local bee population. So I think there is nuggets of stories on this journey, so trends have to start somewhere. And one other story I couldn't find, well, it was a video, you know, a boy was like a Sahara Desert as the field to the west of us was blowing dust across as it didn't rain this spring. And I see we haven't ploughed that field. So I think practical realities on the ground will hit more if climate change starts to kick in.
Okay, James, thanks for that point. The Q&A list is extending, so I'm going to crack on fairly quickly. Question from Dave Craig. Dave, I don't know if you're able to ask this about a role for fire.
Oh yes, I'll have a go. Yes, it's just that I can see is that there's a sort of conflict between wilding, rewilding, and letting things do their own thing, and watching 100 years of hard-won woodland go up in smoke because that's natural.
Paul or David, do you want to address that?
So fire is not my thing. Certainly in Mediterranean parts of Europe, livestock grazing in woodlands is seen as a way of managing and reducing sort of fire risk. But I don't see fire as being a management tool. And within sort of Scottish woodlands, I would still see fire as being a risk to the future of those woodlands.
Yeah. So you.
Sorry.
Just to say, you would manage fire out of the equation and say the objective is not to have fires in Scotland in the woods.
Yep. Certainly, you know, from our experience, our Montaigne woodland is 21 years old, but the last few years where we've had really drought conditions, we have been paranoid that somebody would drop a match, you know, up in that remote part of the hill, and you know those small trees would be completely decimated. So. I don't know, Paul, if you have any further views on fire yourself.
No, I don't really have much to add to that.
Okay, thank you. You happy with that, Dave?
Well, it's just a conflict. I don't know if it's resolvable, but we know that the character of forests changes if you stop fire, and that alters both the trees and the wildlife within it. Which is clearly not natural or wild, but I don't know. I'm not saying that I've got a good answer.
I suppose it might be, just to continue on, David, it might be something that becomes an increasing issue in Scotland into the future. Currently, only 18% of Scotland is under woodland, and 80% of that woodland is non-native conifer plantation, so only 20% of it is native woodland in any sort of way. If that proportion starts to change, there might be a bigger role for asking what role fire might actually play to managing those areas in the future. But currently, most are stepping away from cairngorms, then the vast majority of native woodland existing across Scotland is existing in small remnant patches, which would be very vulnerable to fire.
Yes, I don't know. I mean, I know Paul's pretty neutral, but I wonder when he's planting his forests, whether he puts in fire breaks or whether he just prays.
No, I think we haven't planned for extensive fires. I mean, we've gone into a native woodland scheme. We took all the advice from the forestry people that are helping us with the plan, and we are where we are. Of course, there's always a threat of fire if you have an exceptionally dry summer and you've got many people perhaps walking around and there's a risk of fire. But we don't consider it to be something that we're overly worried about right now. Of course, it's going to be a concern one day, but for now, we haven't really paid much attention. We're more interested in getting carbon sequestration going, and more interested in getting all the small insects back and everything like this. So if we worried about everything, every outcome for every situation, I'd never get out of bed in the morning. So, you know, I just try and do the macro thing, the right thing. And what other things come out of that, it won't make everybody happy. Keep most people happy most of the time, but not everyone all the time, in regards to many different aspects of rewilding.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much. We'll move on. So the lady who masquerades as Malcolm has a question for Paul about access under the Land Reform Scotland Act. Do you want to go ahead with your...
Yeah, I do. The proposal, as I understand it, involves fencing off 23,000 acres for a sort of game reserve for wolves, and that conflicts with the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003. And I wondered if Paul has got any words on that conflict.
Sure. Yes. Thank you for asking that. Of course, in anything we do, when it comes to something radical, something different, something left of center, there has to be some sort of compromise from our side, compromise from people's side. Otherwise, we'll just stay as we are and we'll continue on and there won't be much change. We are where we are today by everything that's happened in the past. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, my parents, everything that's happened today is a result of previous actions. So unless we're prepared to embrace change, we will be in a proverbial crazy eight and we will continue on the trajectory we have at the moment going on. And COVID is just a pinprick of the situation we face. So, of course, I realize the access legislation. And of course, I realize certain people want to do certain other activities like build rocket launching stations and huge supermarket car parks and maybe Disneyland want to come to Aberdeen or Glasgow and open up and have Disneyland, and they'd have to have what's called a derogation. But the whole purpose of what I'm trying to do is to encourage more people into the countryside so we get out of concrete and we connect to nature so we can save it. Because without nature, we have no life. We depend on nature. Nature does not depend on us. So what I say is, of course, there'll be a compromise. But how that plays out, I don't know right now. At the moment, we have 23,000 acres. The vision requires 50,000 acres. I am in discussions with neighbors. That's the first hurdle to get over. People have been a bit, you know, when I arrived on the scene back in 2003 and spoke about wolves, there was a lot of skepticism, but I've got to be quite clear that it's a controlled release. Either we have wolves back in some capacity, or we just never have them back again. Because the idea of wolves running around the countryside of Great Britain in the freedom of the countryside is a non-starter. I've seen enough evidence in other parts of developed countries with overpopulation, with lots of livestock. You know, unless people want to change their practices and build huge fences to protect their sheep at night and stay out with the flocks all day, you know, unless you're going to do those sort of things, it's not going to happen. So I'm just proposing a compromise, something where we go, yes, we got rid of these things conveniently because they were inconvenient to us. We got rid of them, and now we're prepared to just make an adjustment to 1% of the Highlands of Scotland. So the idea is to have 20,000 visitors a year, which would trickle in every day of the year. So it would be like probably 5 or 6, 7 minibuses a day. It's not like coaches. And it would be spread right through the year because the winter would be a very popular time to come. So, and then there could be some access for the community that wants to come and just walk unguided. That's a compromise, absolutely. I don't see any reason why we can't do that. But just to block an idea, because we've got our heads in a certain direction, I think is crazy, particularly when I'm trying to get 20 times more people in theatre than there would have been before. Now, a lot of people might not like that. They go, well, no, we want our peace and quiet. We want this just the way it is. We'll keep it in aspect. But I'm afraid we live on an island with 65 million people. And if we don't get them out of the cities and into nature, they'll have no respect for it, no regard, and no concern about it. And that worries me.
Can I just say, you won't be surprised to know that I'm not very happy with that answer. I mean, the access rights were hard won, and it's being able to walk over the landscape is a big draw for people to get out of the cities into the countryside. And I did notice a few other questions being concerned about, you know, fencing an area in people who come from Allerdale area.
Yeah, well,
I think it just we're talking about two different things. I'm speaking about access to the land for anybody who wants to walk on it.
Yeah, well, as I said, there will be some form of compromise, I'm quite sure, because it won't go ahead otherwise. And if it doesn't go ahead, that'll be a shame, because I think there'll be an economic benefit for the community, which at the moment, as you probably are aware, is not the strongest community, because, I mean, regarding the A9 being cut off, going up through the Dornoch Road Bridge and so on, I think that it could do with a lift. And we can say, well, no, we don't want that, we want this. But in life, there has to be some form of of compromise. Otherwise, we just stay as we are. And I'm not really satisfied with the countryside, just as it is. We're talking about rewilding, and I'm giving one idea forward, and it may not happen. And if it doesn't happen, I'll be sorry for that. But I really appreciate the fact of your thoughts about the access and hard fought. I'm trying to get more people into the hills than would have been before. That's all. Well, I think we're talking about a similar thing, but there's this fence which is an issue. But of course, we can't bring wolves back without some kind of a control. So
well, I think maybe I would like to hear, the questions from the other people who put the questions about the fences, particularly people who live in Allerdale, the Allerdale area, and see what they think.
Well, I can't really add much more.
Can I just say this is a very passionate debate, obviously. I'm not sure we have enough time to cover it in full tonight, but obviously watch this space. I'm going to move on to the next question, and this is from Kenneth, and it's to you, Davey. How do you see maximum productivity, i.e. all products for human or animal consumption, being undertaken by smaller scale landowners or tenants, for example, crofters?
Well, certainly crofts or small farms, particularly given that crofts have only a small amount of fields in by area. They might manage in common larger areas of sort of common grazing, but in general the land that's immediately under their control is relatively small, so that will limit what any one croft can actually do. But I would, a bit like what James was doing in terms of zooming back out, I would look at it at a landscape level. And have some facilitator in there and suggest what crofter A could do that would complement what crofter B could do that would complement what crofter C could do. Take a landscape scale approach, and hopefully, if we ever, despite having a land use strategy for over 10 years, if we ever get off our backsides in Scotland and actually implement the land use partnership approach, hopefully some of that will actually help ensure that individual small-scale farms and crofts still have a big role to play in the delivery of public goods, these biodiversity benefits. It just means it needs a different model of how you actually achieve that.
Okay. Thanks for that, David. I'm going to move on. I've got a question from Sandra to yourself regarding stock numbers in fencing. Sandra, do you want to ask your question? Are you able to ask your question? If not, I'll go ahead do it on your behalf. David, did you reduce your stock numbers as a result of fencing off areas of the farm?
So from the low ground areas of the farm, no. As I said in the presentation, we were able to make those changes without having any impact on the productivity of the low ground parts of the farm. In the upland areas, we did reduce our stocking numbers, but we actually reduced those stocking numbers before we even considered putting the woodland in that glen. We had almost twice the number of sheep 25 years ago than we do have now. 25 years ago, we were operating a very high input, high output system because financially, economically, that made sense back in the day because the price available for sheep on the market actually allowed us to actually do that. And many other hill farmers allowed them to do that as well. But we did actually, the only way we could achieve a high output in lamb from those mountain pastures was to actually have a high input of bought-in feed, of bought-in materials. And so 25 years ago, we changed to a more extensive grazing system, a low input system to try and actually highlight how you can still do that. We're actually making more money from that profit, not money, sorry. We're making less money, but more profit from that extensive system than actually, instead of paying gazillion pounds a year to actually bring bought-in feed in to take it up to the sheep in the hill. But then when we did plant the Montaigne woodland in the glen, by planting the bowl of the glen, that meant during the winter, that's where the sheep would normally be congregating, going down to actually escape the worst of the snow. So we had to, initially, actually take those sheep out of that glen and away winter them down in the low ground, because they wouldn't be able to survive in that sort of situation. But ultimately, when we realised that it was going to take a much longer time for the trees to actually establish before we could allow livestock back into that wooded area, and we took the decision not to actually farm or attempt to actually have sheep in the area around the woodland, simply because not only the cost but the biosecurity implications of moving adult sheep from the highlands to the lowlands on an annual basis was just too big a risk. There's a number of diseases out there, but there's a disease called enzootic abortion that's common across the whole of lowland Scotland. But the Highlands are in enzootic abortion free, and we're on a high risk of actually bringing that back into not only our flock but then to neighbouring flocks. So yes, we did reduce stock numbers after we'd planted those trees, but it was about 5 years after. No, yeah, it was about 5 or 7 years after we'd planted those trees before we completely reduced stocking and density in that area. If that answers the question.
Thanks for that, Davey. I've been calling this person Sandra. It turns out they're called John Thomas. And, so hence the confusion when I call them to ask the question.
Right, okay.
So I've got another question from the lady masquerading as Malcolm. She got a question for James. Would you go ahead, please?
Oh yes, was that the one about the citizen people's voice? I was very interested to hear you say that any change has to be bottoms up. And I was wondering, we have the problem in the city of, we have a lovely rewilding area in St. Fittick's Park that is under the threat of being turned into an energy transition zone. So I wondered, what you think of that idea? And you seem to have the same problem with sort of powerful business interests, with house building being built on floodplains.
Yes, it's a big topic. So there's a few things that come to mind. So coming back to this place, so just before Christmas, it was frosty, but I always go to the north side of the valley because it's where the sun is. And I went through a Boyne golf course, and the local greenkeeper was doing some repairs. But what struck me was that the greens were like, midsummer. And so he just had all that knowledge. He said, the last half of his career, he's not really seen. He's had to cut the grass in the winter. So how do we get his knowledge into the community's, democracy? I think there is some progress, but locally, but not as advanced as, say, the community buyouts on the West Coast. So there's one project that, I think it's a model, and it always comes usually from the smaller communities, and it's like the Tarland Wetland group. So I attended their project before COVID. So they've actually brought together the landowner, the farm tenants, the naturalists, the people that live in the valley, and we did a round table questionnaire to all the topics. And I think they've done that a couple of times maybe online since, about how we could retain more water in the Cremar part, and hopefully post COVID we'll start to do that in the Boyne. So I think it's possible, and but that needs to again tie into and maybe if it starts to work there, then maybe some of the other landlords which are not so communicative or participative might see the time to join in. And then maybe just two last points. The 26th of April 2019 is when the Scottish Government passed the legislation to allow any community to compulsory buy any bit of land in Scotland if it meets 3 very tough criteria. So I think that is a game changer. But again, locally in the ground, I don't see many people seeing that, but maybe the Langham and projects out with the West Coast. But again, one of our topics is like land and land reform, and our current thoughts is like, why would we want to, if there was land come up, spend the money buying it when we could, deploy it to sustain the economy? So it's not our preferred goal to go through any pursue buyouts currently, but we do have a desire to return, or in fact it is commons ground. And we don't envisage, if it became more community owned, that it would be these large estates. What are the minimum size units that people can get back on the land like they did pre the divvying up the land to it currently is? You know, people lived at the base of Mount Keane, you know, families, communities, Cayleys, you know, so what is the equivalent unit that we can get back in that sustains a livelihood? And this might mean, you know, our own local currencies and make that sustainable rather than the current ones we live in. So our view is that the land is the commons, and then we can have these more embryonic community, small community ownership. And so the chances of mass bad actors gets reduced because we have lots of different views, and there's not one local governance body that can get a local monopoly over the governance, get the land back into the hands of the people, and things will sort themselves out.
That wasn't quite, was a bit different track from the way I was thinking of, but that's something I would like to see. I think the main problem seems to be that there are people who are prepared to reverse, you know, wonderful work that's been done, or even to ignore their own planners' recommendations. And this is another example of the conflict that there is between, you know, rewilding, however you like to look at it, and, you know, economic interests. A really difficult one.
Yeah, I don't want to get too controversial, but we basically got a construction cartel in the valley. And, you know, the property boom plus the energy thing has created our local landlords into property speculators.
Exactly.
And, you know, they haven't, I don't think we've made evidence-based decisions of where we located these.
No.
Anyway, definitely a big topic, and one we discuss within our group, and hopefully broaden it out to the wider community.
Yeah.
Thanks, James. I'm going to move us on. And I'd like to call on Betty. Your question to Paul.
Hi there, thank you. Hi, Paul. My name's Betty Wright. I live quite near Allerdale, and it's really nice that an estate owner has different ideas with what to do with the land up here, because it's very unusual. And I think a lot of the work you've done with schools and tree planting is very much appreciated by everybody. But I have a real problem with the fencing, as the previous lady called Malcolm did. And it's a very well used area already. There's a lot of tracks go over to the west coast from there. And although when you're at Allerdale, it feels very remote and like the center of the world, you can cycle from my house, which is basically on the east coast, over to the west coast in about 3 hours on the track. So yes, fencing off would be a really big deal. And yeah, I think it would be something that, and the other part of my question was, I wonder, have you ever thought of creating a sort of citizens assembly with local people and experts and people to discuss your project and what your vision is for the future and the area?
Yeah, thank you. A good comments and questions. So we've been pretty strong in our outreach to the younger generation with this program we've been running, and I've not been necessarily in a hurry for this project. I've been kind of distracted with other things in other countries, so I don't get too impatient. I just, at the right moment in time, will want to forge and press ahead if I can. So when people say, well, you know, you've been talking about this, I've actually asked nobody or engaged anybody, or actually I've spoken to some journalists with an idea. So it's not like I've gone knocking on the door of any organization to do this. So when it comes to the moment and the time to press ahead, what you're suggesting is absolutely vital. There's no doubt that engaging local community, the adults and whoever living in that area, and embrace them. So we decided last year, 2020, to begin a program inviting community members up to Allerdale for a free day, 4 or 5 hours, and show everybody what's been going on there, because there's obviously a lot of hearsay and they read stuff and hear stuff, but the majority of people, I can tell you, won't have walked up like you may have done or cycled across, which is a great challenging bike ride, because I've done it multiple times myself.
It's very nice.
So I think that is a really good thing to do. And if it wasn't for COVID, we would have started these twice a week. We're going to do Wednesday morning and I think Saturday morning, and we could take up to 10 people at a time and bring people through and show them the journey we've been on. And then, of course, obviously, further down the line, to create some kind of a working group to take this project forward, because I think it will be of huge benefit to the community, the region, and to Scotland to do something like this. It will be the first of its kind in Europe, and I think that it would be just wonderful. And if we don't achieve it, as I said earlier, then fine, it won't happen. And I will just busy myself in Belize and Romania and other places. So it's not like someone's got a gun to my head saying you've got to do it by this date, Paul, otherwise you're going to be a failure. I don't look at it like that. I look at what we've done at Allerdale as being already significant, as thank you, you alluded to. And we're really proud about what we've done. And we do need to share with more people, which is what we will be doing. As soon as we can pop our heads around COVID and find ways of bringing people up on those mornings and have a lunch together and a talk, then we would love to do it. And I think that's the start of that engagement that I think you're seeking. Is that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very helpful, Paul. I mean, I think I look forward to coming up there again. It is one of the most beautiful places that I know. I think it's very special, and I think I can understand you wanting to share it with as many people, and also, be there as much as you can.
I really never bought Allerdale to participate in any field sports. I can't even cast a fly. I couldn't shoot a bird out of the sky if I tried. It's not my thing. My thing, I'm a tree hugger. When people say, what do you do for a living? I'm a tree hugger. I just love nature. And I think the more people that love nature, the more we stand a chance of surviving on this fragile earth.
Well, Paul, next time you're up in the area, you must come and see our local community Woodland, because it is a very special place too, and you'll really enjoy it there.
Well, we will engage after this, symposium.
Thank you.
Yeah, just as a point,
Love
if you
to
want to
come.
exchange contact details, you can do it through the chat. Anyway, while you're in answering mode, Paul, I'm going to call on Faye Wiley to ask her a question about predator reintroduction. Faye, are you able to ask the question yourself? I'll assume not. So, Paul, what do you feel is the next step towards a predator reintroduction into Scotland? What needs to happen first in order to start achieving this vision?
Well, the vision I have is not a reintroduction. So that wolf is something different. I don't believe the wolf personally can be reintroduced into Scotland without some serious issues and impacts. However, when you talk about predator reintroduction, the Scottish wildcat is existing in Scotland, and now there's a great initiative by RZSS, which we're in fact part of. I forgot to mention that earlier, that we have a breeding facility for wildcats. So for me, getting the Scottish wildcat saved from extinction and re-released into Cairngorms Connect and Ardnamurchan, wherever they're going to be going, is a wonderful thing to do. And then obviously there is the Lynx program that David Hetherington and RZS are also interested in, and I'm very supportive of that too. I think that would be an animal that we would just virtually never see and be very elusive and shy. But it's not something I've been involved with the details, but that reintroduction might make sense and hopefully will make sense. But regarding wolves, it's not a reintroduction. This is a fenced or a controlled reserve. There's no other way of describing, I'm afraid. I love to say, if the wolves come up to an area, they'll get electric shock and they'll stay behind or whatever. It's not going to happen. There needs to be a barrier if you're going to bring wolves back into the British Isles. Otherwise, we can wait another 30, 40 years and who knows where we're going to be then.
Okay, Paul, thank you for that. I'm going to go back into sequence now, and I'm going to ask a question on behalf of Rachel. For yourself, Davey, what impacts have the beavers had of your farms in the past 2 years? Has it been mostly positive change, or have there been conflicts with other work you're doing? And did they contribute to the formation of wetlands?
So a range of easy answers, hopefully. They've had minimal impact. It's been a small number of likely young moving through the area rather than choosing to actually stay in on the farm so far. And so there's been damage to individual trees, as you saw, but no impact in terms of damming of any of the burns or watercourses. So it's not really conflicted with any of the work that we're currently doing at all. And no, they didn't contribute to the formation of the wetlands. It was ourselves, Scottish Government funding, and a local contractor with a digger that created those shallow what's called water scrapes and wetland areas. So, but we will wait and see. They are continuing to expand up into the headwaters of the Tay. We await with interest to see what happens once they do start to establish, as they will, on the farms.
Okay, David, thank you very much. For everyone's benefit who's still with us, I'm going to give you a time check. There's 10 minutes to go. I'm going to pull rank now and go down the list and make sure that other people who've not already asked a question get the opportunity. So I'm going to ask a question to Davy on behalf of Bob. Is there a conflict between re-establishing peat bogs and maintaining grouse numbers?
I would say not. So where most of the peatland restoration is likely to occur across Scotland is the west and the northwest, and there are red grouse there, but not in a way that they can be managed as a grouse shooting. There clearly are peatlands and peatland restoration occurring in the Cairngorms, where there is a large grouse population, a managed grouse population. But if the peatlands are restored, then they should be preserved from actually the sort of burning management, that's part of the sort of grouse moor situation. So I don't see a major conflict there. And in fact, well, we will see what the coming year brings, but there may actually be a ban on burning of moorland for grouse management anyway, irrespective of whether it's a concern about peatland or not. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Bob.
I'm sure he'll let us know either through the chat or through some of the means. I'm going to pop down to Richard Oren. Richard, good evening. Do you want to ask your question? This is for everybody, by the way.
Yeah, question to everybody. Thanks for a fascinating talk tonight. What is the lowest hanging fruit? What could be most readily achieved by 2030 in rewilding, as in improving the biodiversity and carbon capture potential of the maximum amount of Scottish landscape in the next 9 years?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first if you're okay, Jeff. Then, given nine-year timescale, I would say peatland restoration. You know, as I say, 60 to 70% of our 2 million hectares of peatland are degraded in some form. There's at least 600,000 hectares of those are potentially restorable, and Scottish Government has a target to restore 250,000 hectares by 2032. If we get anywhere near 250,000 hectares by 2032, that would be amazing to achieve, and also would have both biodiversity benefits, carbon sequestration benefits, water quality benefits, etc. But we need more land managers to actually engage in that restoration process.
Paul, do you have a view on that set of questions?
Could you just repeat the question one more time? Sorry, I was typing a message to the previous lady there.
Hi, Paul. Yes. So what is the lowest hanging fruit? What could be most readily achieved by 2030 in rewilding, as in improving the biodiversity and carbon capture potential of the maximum amount of Scottish landscape in the next 9 years?
Well, thank you. Again, I would say what we've been doing at Allerdale is reducing their numbers to a level of pressure where natural regeneration can occur if there's a seed source around. So abnormal high populations of deer are not going to help things. And so there are many places with over 25, 30 deer per square kilometre. The the amount you would find in a European environment where there are wolves and bears and lynx would be probably like 3. And that would allow for a great amount of regeneration. We're down to 5, as I said earlier, and we're seeing lots of natural regeneration occurring out with deer fences. Planting trees obviously is a great thing to do, and I think that's really taken shape now. I'm very pleased to hear so many landowners are now getting involved with native woodland tree planting, which I think is fantastic. I smile every time I see someone or something in the newspaper reporting on that. And of course, as Davey alluded to, the blocking of peatland drains is also a great thing. So there are 3 things there, I think, that are relatively low hanging fruit that a lot of landowners can look at doing. From an environmental perspective, I mean, I like the ideas of beavers back in river systems for slowing rivers down, flood mitigation, and all the other benefits from all the insect life and so on else that thrives once beavers have been creating ponds. So that would be something that in the right stretches of river, which have got the right environment, then bringing back beavers would be just wonderful.
Okay,
So,
James,
yeah.
do you have a view on that? You want the question
sort of,
repeated again?
No, it's great. Totally agree with the peat bogs. I think, you have to stop the leak first, and I just like my time on these side, they're drying out. Walk 4 hours and you don't get any water, and the point of the story, it's in spring, probably the wettest time of year. So I think stop it, and things. Paul said, I think the one thing I would add is I think we can change the culture. I think the people dimension, the cultural displace theme, I think that is a key to unlocking the change that they describe with that. So I would say culture, local democracy, transforming that can be done instantly in the next few years, and then maybe that gives us a basis for practical implementation.
Thanks.
James, thanks for that sentiment. One last time check. It's 4 minutes to 9. I don't think we turn into pumpkins at 9 o'clock. But on my list, there are 2 more questions from people who've not had a chance to put a question. My sense is that we can cover those 2 questions and then we'll wrap up, if that's okay with everyone. And I will just assume that that's fine, and we'll move straight on. So I'm going to ask this on behalf of Laura Fox. This is to yourself, Paul, about what are your thoughts on reintroduction of large herbivores, specifically European bison, considering conservation efforts?
Yes, I saw that question. Thank you, Sandra. I've been quite close up to certain bison reintroductions, certainly in our project in Romania. And also more recently, I was in the Dehesa in southern Spain, where a landowner brought them back from Poland after a very long journey. But it seems, whilst they're classified as a dangerous wild animal, they will have to be contained behind a stock fence of sorts. So it would be lovely to have them, but I think that the work they do is great, and I think there would be a benefit. There is some dispute about whether or not bison were actually in the uplands of Scotland or not, but they, as a large herbivore, they do great work. And like every animal in this world has something to contribute other than human beings. They all are doing great work. So somewhere in the pyramid of life, in what I call a trophic cascade, bison absolutely fit in there. But it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And unfortunately, in Great Britain, we're missing so much of the jigsaw puzzle that it's very challenging to work out where to start putting the pieces in, because we've lost probably 95% of our biodiversity in the last 1,000 years. So I do like bison. I do think a great job. In the meantime, we're using Highland cattle to replicate as much as possible what the bison would be doing in the riparian areas and possibly some upland areas. So no, I don't think there's much of a chance to see them wandering around in the freedom of the countryside right now until someone says they're not dangerous.
Okay, Paul, thanks for that. I hope that answers your question, Laura. And we come to the last one. And again, this is for yourself, Tom. Oh, no, I do this sometimes. It's for yourself, Paul, and it's from Tom Balag. Given the size of Allerdale and the prospect of wolf reintroduction into a fenced environment, have you given much thought to the future natural dispersal of their offspring and population gene flow? Will there be a need to connect to habitat corridors?
Yeah, well, I think good question. Again, but with a fence, it would be a control, like all the large carnivores in South African game reserves. When you go down on holiday there, everything is managed at a certain level, and there would be no migration. Eventually, it's quite likely that the breeding females will be neutered, and you would have a situation which wouldn't be 100% perfect. But what is perfect? Nothing right now. So, so compromise again. There will be no migration, and it's been done many times over in South Africa with over a dozen carnivores that want to breed and procreate and grow and expand, and that's been mitigated by intervention. So, like we put man on the moon, I'm sure we can do something regarding 2 packs of wolves. So there is no migration opportunities. I'd love it to be, but as for earlier reasons I explained earlier, thought of releasing wolves into the wild of the Scottish or British countryside would be pretty catastrophic as far as I'm concerned. So we have to create this compromise. I hope that explains. And you would bring in new stock from Sweden, say, where you would find the original family wolves, which would grow into 2, and that's when you'd have to intervene, because you had more than 15 wolves in an area of 50,000 acres. The deer would be compromised, and you'd end up with a huge swing board effect that happened in the Great Lakes, in the island up on Lake Huron, I think, where wolves got onto the island, and there was a big seesaw for 50, 60 years. Rolf Peterson in Sweden documented that. So we wouldn't want that to happen, so you'd have to manage that situation.
Paul, thanks very much for that. That's a wrap for the Q&A. I'd like to thank Paul, Davey, and James for putting up with some really challenging questions. Thank you very much. And also to everybody attending for keeping with us and engaging with our speakers. I'm going to hand back to Alison now to do a final wrap up. Alison, go ahead.
Yes, and thank you, Jeff, for doing a great Q&A session. Well, I think you'll agree that it's been a really, really good night. I've really enjoyed listening to all the 3 speakers and the question and answer session. It's given, I think, a lot of food for thought. And I think that what comes out is, although there is a definition of rewilding, that everyone's thoughts about rewilding to some extent differ. And really, it's up to landowners themselves to think about what works best in the area that they actually do have. But there's a wealth of knowledge and experience out there that they can gain that knowledge from. We had some interesting talks earlier in the year from people who do smallhold farmings out in the Cairngorms, and they use Highland cows, as does Paul, for that kind of large herbivore effect that some people have been talking about in this talk. But anyway, thank you all so much for coming. We're going to try and get a bigger Zoom membership for our next Climate Cafe, so we can have over 100 people. And just do please come back on the 2nd of February for our one about food growing, and also think about Climate Week as well in March. I hope you all have a lovely rest of the evening, and take care. And the recordings, I put it onto the chat. You can just follow us on YouTube, and they'll all be put on there. But we'll put it on our social media, particularly our Facebook. So if you follow us on Facebook, you'll get a link to the recordings too. Anyway, thank you all. Take care. Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.